Imagine a building that contains every book ever written. Every poem, every scientific theory, every history, every philosophy, every medical text, every map of the known world. All of it gathered in one place in one city on the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. That building existed. It stood for centuries in the ancient city of Alexandria, on the northern coast of Egypt. It was called the Mausoleum, the House of the Muses, and attached to it was the greatest library the ancient world had ever seen. Scholars called it simply the library, as if there were no other library worth naming. At its height, it held somewhere between 400,000 and 700,000 scrolls. In a world where every book had to be copied by hand on papyrus one page at a time, that number is almost incomprehensible. It represented not just the collected knowledge of Greece, but of Egypt, of Persia, of Babylon, of India, of every civilization the ancient Mediterranean world had ever touched. It was the internet before the internet, the world's memory, stored in a single building. And then it was gone. How it was lost and what the loss meant is one of the most debated questions in the history of human civilization. Emperors have been blamed. Generals have been blamed. Religions have been blamed. The truth, as it so often is, turns out to be more complicated, more troubling, and more instructive than any single villain can explain. My name is Brian, and this is Vanished Worlds. Tonight, we go to ancient Alexandria, to the city that was once the intellectual capital of the known world, to ask what was really lost when the library burned, and whether we have ever truly recovered. This is the story of the Library of Alexandria. To understand the library, you first have to understand Alexandria, because the city and the library were inseparable. One created the other. Both were the product of a single, extraordinary act of ambition. In 331 BC, Alexander the Great marched into Egypt. He was 25 years old. He had already conquered half the known world. And instead of looting Egypt or burning it to the ground, he did something unexpected. He built a city. He chose a small fishing village on the Mediterranean coast, where a narrow strip of land separated the sea from a large inland lake. He walked the site himself, tracing the outline of streets with handfuls of grain, according to legend, because he had run out of chalk. When birds descended to eat the grain, his soothsayers declared it a good omen. He named the city after himself, Alexandria. Alexander did not live to see it built. He died in Babylon 8 years later, at 32, of causes that historians still debate. But the city he founded grew into something even he might not have imagined. Within a century, it had become the largest city in the Western world. Larger than Rome, larger than Carthage, larger than Athens. At its peak, perhaps 1 million people lived there. The library was the creation of Alexander's successors, the Ptolemaic dynasty, a line of Greek-speaking pharaohs who ruled Egypt for 3 centuries. The first Ptolemy, a general who had served under Alexander, decided that his new kingdom needed not just military power and agricultural wealth, but intellectual prestige. He wanted Alexandria to be the center of all human knowledge. So he sent agents across the Mediterranean world with orders and with money. Their mission was simple: find every book that exists and bring it here. They went to Athens and copied the great works of the philosophers. They went to Babylon and translated astronomical tables that were centuries old. They went to Persia and India and brought back texts that Greek scholars had never seen. Ships arriving in the harbor at Alexandria were searched, and any scrolls they carried were confiscated, copied, and returned. Sometime. The library was not simply a place to store books. It was a research institution, the ancient world's equivalent of a modern university, or perhaps of something even more ambitious than that. Attached to the library was the Mausoleum, the museum in the original sense of the word. Scholars from across the Greek-speaking world were invited to come and live there. The Ptolemaic kings paid their salaries, housed them, fed them, and asked only one thing in return: that they think. The list of people who worked at the library reads like the greatest intellectual gathering in human history. Euclid, who wrote the Elements, a systematic treatment of geometry so complete and so rigorous that it was used as a textbook in universities for 2,000 years, and whose logical structure influenced mathematics up to the 20th century. He worked in Alexandria. Some accounts say he ran a school there. Archimedes, the greatest mathematician and engineer of the ancient world, the man who calculated the value of pi, who invented the screw pump, who designed war machines so terrifying that they held off a Roman siege for years, spent time in Alexandria as a young man, and the mathematical tradition he absorbed there shaped everything he later achieved. Eratosthenes, the head librarian, calculated the circumference of the earth using nothing more than a stick, a shadow, and his knowledge of geometry, and got it right to within a fraction of a percent. He also created the first accurate map of the world and invented the concept of leap years. He did all of this in Alexandria. Hipparchus cataloged the positions of over 800 stars, created the first star charts, and developed the system of latitude and longitude that we still use today. He worked in Alexandria. Herophilus, studying in Alexandria at a time when Egyptian tradition permitted the dissection of human cadavers, became the first person in recorded history to systematically study human anatomy. He identified the brain as the seat of intelligence. He described the nervous system. He laid the foundations of modern medicine. He worked in Alexandria. These were not isolated geniuses. They were colleagues. They ate together, argued together, read each other's work, challenged each other's conclusions. The library created a culture of intellectual cross-pollination that had never existed before, and would not exist again in quite the same way for over 1,000 years. Here is what makes the story of the library's destruction so painful. Some of what was lost we know about. We have the titles of books that no longer exist, listed in ancient catalogs, referenced by other authors, quoted in fragments that survived in other texts. We know what was there. We just cannot read it. Sophocles, one of the three great Athenian playwrights, wrote over 100 plays. 7 survive. The rest are known only by title. Among them, Epigonoi, Telephus, Phaedra, Andromeda. What were they like? What did Sophocles understand about these stories that we will now never know? The library had them. Alexandria held them, and they are gone. Aristotle, who founded the discipline of logic, who wrote works on physics, biology, ethics, politics, poetry, rhetoric, and the nature of the soul, left behind a body of work so vast that ancient catalogs list over 200 separate texts. Less than a third survive. The lost works include his dialogues, polished, elegant pieces of writing that ancient readers apparently considered among the finest Greek prose ever written. They are gone. The astronomer Aristarchus of Samos proposed, in a text now lost, that the earth revolves around the sun, not the other way around. He did this in the 3rd century BC. Had his reasoning survived, had the scientific tradition of Alexandria continued without interruption, the Copernican revolution might have happened 17 centuries earlier. It did not. Aristarchus's heliocentric theory was dismissed, forgotten, and had to be rediscovered by Copernicus in 1543. 17 centuries. This is what the loss of the library means in practical terms. Not just the destruction of old books, the interruption of a chain of knowledge that had been building, link by link, for 3 centuries, and whose continuation might have changed the entire trajectory of human civilization. We do not know what diseases might have been cured, what engineering problems might have been solved, what understanding of the natural world might have reached us 6 centuries, 8 centuries, 1,000 years earlier than it did. The dark ages that followed the fall of Rome are, in part, the shadow cast by the burning of the Library of Alexandria. Now we have to talk about what actually happened to the library. And this is where the history becomes complicated, because the Library of Alexandria was not destroyed in a single dramatic moment. It died slowly, over centuries, through neglect, through underfunding, through war, through the slow erosion of the political will that had created it. The most famous story is Julius Caesar. In 48 BC, Caesar arrived in Alexandria amid a civil war between Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy XIII. During the fighting, Caesar set fire to the ships in the harbor to prevent them being used against him. The fire spread to the waterfront. Ancient sources say that books stored in warehouses near the docks were destroyed, perhaps 40,000 scrolls intended for export. This was not the library itself, but it was a blow, and it was the beginning. Mark Antony, trying to compensate for the loss, reportedly gave Cleopatra 200,000 scrolls from the Library of Pergamon, the second greatest library in the ancient world. Some accounts say those scrolls never arrived or arrived and were damaged. The truth is uncertain. Then came Aurelian. In 270 AD, the Roman Emperor Aurelian suppressed a revolt in Alexandria and destroyed much of the Brucheion, the royal quarter of the city where the library and museum were located. Ancient sources are vague about the extent of the damage, but it is likely that the library, by this point, was already a shadow of what it had been. Centuries of political instability, declining royal patronage, and the gradual shift of Roman intellectual life toward other cities had already diminished it. Then came Theophilus. In 391 AD, the Christian Patriarch of Alexandria, acting on orders from Emperor Theodosius, organized the destruction of the Serapeum, a great temple in Alexandria that housed a secondary collection of books, sometimes called the Daughter Library. The temple was torn down. The books were burned. Ancient writers record the event with grief. And then, in 642 AD, came the Arab conquest of Egypt. The general Amr ibn al-Az captured Alexandria for the Caliph Omar. A later legend, first recorded 6 centuries after the event, claims that Omar ordered the library burned, saying that if the books agreed with the Quran, they were unnecessary, and if they disagreed, they were dangerous. Most modern historians believe this story is fabricated, added to the historical record long after the fact. By 642 AD, the library, in any meaningful sense, had already ceased to exist. The truth is harder and sadder than a single moment of destruction. The Library of Alexandria was not burned by one villain on one day. It was allowed to die gradually by a civilization that stopped caring enough to protect it. There is one more name that history has attached to the destruction of Alexandria's intellectual legacy, and it is the most haunting of all. Hypatia. She was born around 360 AD, the daughter of Theon of Alexandria, one of the last great scholars to work in the tradition of the Mouseion. She became a mathematician and philosopher, one of the finest of her age. She lectured publicly on the works of Plato and Aristotle. Students came from across the Mediterranean world to hear her speak. She was, by all accounts, brilliant, dignified, and utterly unafraid. In 415 AD, she was murdered. A Christian mob, incited by the Patriarch Cyril of Alexandria, intercepted her carriage on the way to her school. They dragged her out. They beat her to death with tiles torn from the street. They burned her body. No one was punished. Hypatia was not the last scholar in Alexandria. The city continued to have thinkers and teachers for centuries after her death. But her murder marks, in the historical memory, the moment when Alexandria's ancient promise, the idea that knowledge was sacred, that the pursuit of understanding was the highest human calling, was extinguished. She is remembered now as a symbol, not just of the library, but of what the library represented. The belief that human beings, through reason and inquiry and the patient accumulation of knowledge, could understand the universe they lived in. That belief did not die with her. It survived in fragments, in the works that were copied and recopied and carried across the desert by scholars who understood their value. It survived in Arabic translations made by Islamic scholars during the golden age of Islam, scholars who recognized in the Greek texts a tradition worth preserving, and who added to it and passed it on to medieval Europe, where it eventually ignited the Renaissance. The chain was broken, but it was not destroyed. Today, in the city of Alexandria, there is a new library. It opened in 2002, built on what archaeologists believe was the site of the ancient Mausoleum. It is called the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, the new Library of Alexandria. Its roof is a great tilted disc of granite, designed to look like the rising sun. Inside, it holds 8 million books, and its reading room, a cascade of terraces descending toward the sea, can seat 2,000 scholars at once. It is beautiful, it is impressive, and it carries, in every stone, the weight of what came before it. But here is the question that the new library forces us to ask. Not whether we can rebuild what was lost, we cannot. The works of Sophocles will not be recovered. The heliocentric proofs of Aristarchus will not be found. Hypatia's lectures will not be reconstructed. The question is whether we have learned anything from the loss. The Library of Alexandria was not destroyed by ignorance. It was destroyed by the slow withdrawal of the conditions that made it possible, by rulers who no longer funded it, by wars that disrupted the networks of trade and communication that fed it, by ideological movements that viewed certain kinds of knowledge as dangerous or unnecessary, by the simple, ordinary human tendency to take for granted the things that have always been there until they are gone. Those conditions are not ancient. They are not historical curiosities. They are familiar. We live in an age of unprecedented access to information. Every library that has ever existed fits on a device in your pocket. And yet the institutions that create, verify, and preserve knowledge, universities, research centers, archives, libraries, are under constant pressure. They are underfunded, questioned, politicized, and sometimes deliberately dismantled. The scrolls that burned in Alexandria did not burn because no one could have saved them. They burned because no one did. That is the real lesson of the library. Not that knowledge is fragile, though it is, but that the willingness to protect it must be actively maintained in every generation by people who understand what is at stake. The ancient Alexandrians understood for a while, and then they forgot. My name is Brian, and this has been Vanished Worlds. If this story made you think, if it reminded you of something worth protecting, subscribe and come back, because the ancient world is full of things we lost before we knew their value. And we are still, in every generation, deciding what we will choose to keep.